And welcome back to our next edition of the CBB Review Studio podcast. I am Dan Siegel. I am joined, as always, by my co-hosts, Matt Majinski and Ben Anderson. Our apologies for last week. Just couldn't work out logistically in the schedules to get a recording up there. But we are back live here, and we will be for every Sunday going forward at 9 o'clock Eastern. We're discussing this past week in college basketball. Guys, how's it going?
Doing great, as always. It was a great week of hoops. Can't wait to see what the next week brings.
Yeah, I feel like we're kind of at that point in the college basketball season. Like, we know what teams are now about now, for the most part. Like, there are very few teams that I feel like we're still trying to figure out who they are, what their identity is. And if we still are trying to figure that out, that's not a bad thing. That just means that it's a team that brings a lot of excitement. So.
Yeah, I mean, there's one team where I think that's exactly what it is. I still can't figure it out. We'll talk about that over the course of this show. But let's get into our winners and losers. We'll start with you, Matt. What was your weekly winner for this past week?
Yeah, obviously, I feel like it was a week where a lot went on in college basketball. But if I had one winner, it came from this Saturday. It was a big Saturday in college hoops. There were a lot of games, and this is a game that's close to my heart. And it's the rivalry between Syracuse and Georgetown, a new chapter between the Orange and the Hoyas. And I think the biggest reason why this was the winner for me wasn't just because my team won in the end, obviously, go Orange, proud Newhouse alum, but the way that this rivalry seems to be taking a new step forward. It was built on Jim Boeheim and John Thompson. And obviously, John Thompson didn't coach nowhere as long as Jim Boeheim did, but John Thompson's son then took over as the head coach of Georgetown. When Patrick Ewing took over, he was a player that Boeheim coached against. So there's always been a wrinkle there ever since this rivalry really took off. This was the first time where none of that was a part of the rivalry, but it seemed to take a little bit of a twist to maybe keep it budding. Ed Cooley, earlier on in the week, said, go to hell with Syracuse. We care about Georgetown. Nothing wrong with that. He's right. You got to care about your own team, but it certainly adds more fuel to the fire. Syracuse wins a road game. Both coaches say that they want to continue the rivalry. So, honestly, just a good rivalry that I'm glad is being continued, and I'm glad it ended in the right way for everyone involved.
Yeah, I'm going to take the next one because my winner actually falls along the theme of rivalries. For me, I'm going more along the angle of in-state rivalries because there were lots of these matchups this past week, and there will be even more in the coming weeks. We'll talk about Iowa and Iowa State, how that game went. We'll talk about the New Jersey one between Rutgers and Seton Hall. I was at the UMass Lowell game. There was BYU and Utah. That was a good one where the Utes came on top. Xavier played Cincinnati and won. What else? Clemson survived South Carolina. I just love these local rivalries. I purely believe that amidst conference realignment, they just become so much more important to cherish. And it's really what makes college sports different. Which makes college sports better than professional sports, just the meaning of these individual games. I do wish more high majors went to local mid-major arenas more often, but I really appreciate when they do. And then, Ben, what's your winner of the week?
So my winner is going to be a player this time. It's going to be Braden Smith. Arguably the best game of the week in college basketball was Purdue's win over Alabama in Toronto. It was a really cool moment for Zach Edey to have sort of a homecoming. But as far as the supporting cast goes for the Boilermakers, no one really showed up but Smith. And I think he's really taken a step forward this year. He got a lot of judgment, a lot of backlash for generally Purdue's guards play last year, especially in the tournament. Ultimately led to their fall against Fairleigh Dickinson, but he really stepped it up. He had 27 points to go along with 35 from Edey. He also had 8 assists to just 1 turnover, and no other Boilermakers scored more than 7 points throughout the game. So it was really important for him to show up. He would not, the Boilermakers would not have won this game if it wasn't for Smith and a step forward throughout. So I wanted to give him a shout out to show that, he's really been moving forward in his college career.
Yeah, you sent me a text. I totally agree. That's a good call. Matt, what's your loser of the week?
Yeah, loser is, I'm staying in the ACC for this one, Kenny Payne. It's tough, and I feel like I don't want to single him out because we could really go with Louisville every single week if we wanted to for a loser of the week. But when it gets down to it, I felt like Louisville was building something. They had started to win some games after last year. They couldn't beat anyone. They're at least beating some mid-major teams that they should beat. They're close in some of these games. They were close in the Virginia Tech game. They were close a couple weeks ago to Texas. And then you lose on the road to DePaul, a one-win DePaul team who is not a team that should be in the Big East, the great Big East, a power conference. I don't even think Conference USA would want DePaul back. That's how bad this program has gotten. It has gotten to the point where, like, take Chicago State over DePaul. I'm being serious. Like, they are that bad of a program, and they go and beat Louisville, a Louisville team who, just when you're building something, you lose. And I feel like this all goes on Kenny Payne, because how do you not get your team ready to win that game? Like, I feel like you need to tell them, hey, we got a good opportunity to be above 500 if we handle business against this Blue Demons team. And don't get me wrong, there's still power conference talent on this DePaul team. I don't want to shade the players, but the coaching and the overall program of DePaul is, the main reason why they've suffered this much. I mean, it's just tough to get out of a rut like that. And this just goes to show how much this Louisville program is also in a hole.
Yeah, that was the ultimate sickos bowl, the DePaul Louisville game. I low-key wanted to make that one of our game picks, but anyway, we move on. Ben, what's your loser of the week?
Yeah, my loser is the undefeated teams over this weekend in particular. On December 7th, there were 13 of them. We are now down to 7. 6 of them lost in the past 3 days, whether that be BYU or TCU or Princeton losing today, or Nevada or Colorado State or Cincinnati in one of those in-state rivalries you mentioned before. It was a tough weekend for the undefeated teams. Now there are only 7 left. It'll be interesting to see who lasts the longest. Arguably, JMU has the best shot due to its easier schedule than the other power conference teams. But Houston, you can make a valid argument for. And Arizona, I mean, they look pretty unstoppable throughout the week. So there's a lot of great options. Be interesting to see where it goes from here. But tough weekend for the teams with a 0 in the loss column overall.
And then finally, for my loser of the week, I'm going to go with the Big Ten, more specifically their defensive reputation that they've developed over the years. And for good reason, they're known as like a physical, good, hard-nosed league. But this weekend, or this past week in the whole, in terms of their just non-conference games, they were giving up a lot of points. I mean, it starts with Iowa, as expected, just the opposite of their football team. 90 points allowed versus Michigan and Iowa State, and 87 points allowed to Purdue. That's an 0-3 week for the Hawkeyes. Not good. Indiana getting 100-pieced by Auburn. Even Purdue in that game that they beat Alabama, they kind of let Alabama's offense come alive a little bit. The Big Ten does remain the second best conference in terms of the average Torvik defensive rating, but not a good week for the Big Ten's defense. And it's just something that hopefully they can move past. There's a lot of Big Ten conference games going on, which we will discuss. Let's get into last week's scores that were most notable, though. So I believe we have the Big Ten in there somewhere. Yeah, we have one game. We had Wisconsin defeating Michigan State 70-57. Not much to say there. The Badgers just look like a good team with an actual offensive pulse. They were handled by Arizona this week, which I believe Wisconsin's clearly a step below. That's still a pleasant surprise. Where do you guys want to go next? Ben, I'll throw it to you. Maybe, I don't know, you want to start with UConn, North Carolina, go a little chronological here. This happened on Tuesday.
We could do that. I was actually going to go to the second game on that list, Illinois defeating FAU. That was one of the best games I've watched all season so far. It was such an enjoyable experience to see that over at Jimmy V. Marcus Domask and Terrence Shannon each going for 30 in the same game was really impressive. I thought that Illinois really looked great, and Florida Atlantic didn't look like they didn't belong, which was something I think a few people were a little concerned about. Is that March magic going to wear off in the regular season? But they looked really good. Illinois lost a tough one at Tennessee over the weekend, but overall a good week for the Illini. As for UConn and North Carolina, I mean, UConn, I think, is the best team in the Big East. I think you can make the argument for. I would worry about playing them more than Marquette at this point. It's right there for each of them, but I think that's where I'm at right now. Two great teams, two top 5 teams in my opinion. But an impressive win over the Tar Heels, and yeah, that's sort of my thoughts on those two games. Matt, what do you think about UConn and North Carolina?
Yeah, wow. I want to talk a little bit about that right there because I would probably edge Marquette as the best team in the Big East personally. And I guess I'll go with I feel like UConn proved a lot. It's one of the two. Those are easily the top 2 teams in the Big East with Creighton right there and Villanova's still there. They've shown what they can prove. But I feel like UConn really bounced back in a good way. Obviously, it was a tough loss at Kansas the week prior, and they're able to, use the Garden to their advantage and take down a really good North Carolina team. But I feel like when you're playing Connecticut, there's a lot of different guys that can score. And now that Stephen Castle is back, it gives them one more. Donovan Clingan is a tough guy to prepare for, but he doesn't really have a bag. I mean, let's be honest. Donovan Clingan doesn't really have any moves. He still is trying to learn that. He definitely doesn't have a shot either, but he has a real physical body that can run the court. Early on, he showed that he can play more minutes because that was an issue the year before. And, I mean, look, they beat Armando Bacot in North Carolina. So clearly, even though Hunter Dickinson handled him, Connecticut was able to find a way to win against another good big man. But for Marquette, this is the one impressive game for me. Beating a Texas team, who I'm not sold on at all, by 21 points. To me, Tyler Kolek is that difference maker that UConn doesn't have. Last year, UConn had it in Adama Sanogo and Jordan Hawkins. I think they still have it a little bit. I know that Tristan Newton had that big game against Kansas, but I think it was a little bit of a fluke because he's not like a knockdown three-point shooter in that way. Those were tough shots. But Tyler Kolek against the Longhorns just went off. I mean, that guy is a hooper. To me, he's a first-team All-American in college basketball. He's gotten even better from last year, which is hard to believe. And I think Marquette is really showing what they're made of. They've already had one of the toughest non-conference schedules playing in the Maui Invitational. And then they go and win by 21 points against Texas. I mean, that is incredible to me.
Yeah, I think a reasonable case could be made for either one, Marquette or UConn. I do think maybe 21 points is a lot, but that result does kind of accurately reflect where those two teams are. I mean, just to speak very briefly on Texas, I think they're going to have some struggles in the conference play this year. They can't just go shot for shot, so to speak, with these teams. I don't think they're good enough defensively, and I don't think they're good enough offensively to keep up. So I wouldn't be surprised to see them have a 500 conference record or something like that. As far as the other games, Iowa State, just quickly shout out to the Cyclones crowd. That was just an electric rivalry game, and the Cyclones gave the crowd every reason to be fired up with their 90-65 performance. Just good to see an offensive explosion from the Cyclones. I know the teams that they've played recently, they've all had bad defenses, Iowa very much included, but also recently put up 99 against DePaul and 107 against, Prairie View A&M. But just to see Iowa State putting up those numbers, I doubted their offense a lot. So that's good to see. Rutgers, Seton Hall, another rivalry game. Rutgers winning that one 70-63. I know Princeton beat Rutgers, but it's good to see these in-state rivalry games just happen. Garden State Hardwood Trophy, I think is the name of that. So Rutgers got to experience that. And then anybody could talk about the last one we had, Memphis and Texas A&M, or any other takeaways you guys got. I'll start with you, Ben.
Yeah, I'll cover one thing I did want to note before we glossed over Michigan State. They did lose to Nebraska in a late game today, dropping to 4-5, under 500 as a top 5 preseason team. Maybe we were a little bit ambitious ranking them that high. Izzo's definitely got some stuff to figure out. On Memphis and Texas A&M, it's going to be hard for the Aggies to win any game if they shoot 6 for 33 and Wade Taylor goes over 9 from beyond the arc. So that's never going to win you any games. David Jones has been so impressive for the Tigers all year. Dropped 29 today. Quinterly also had a nice game with 24 and 5 assists there. I think Memphis is a really dangerous team. They're definitely going to give Florida Atlantic a run for their money in the AAC. And that's going to be a really compelling conference 1-2 race to look at as we move into the rest of the season.
Yeah, I mean, real quick, I know we've kind of hit on a lot of this, but Wisconsin, I think, even though they lost to Arizona later on in the week, that win over Michigan State shows. I mean, they've had numerous good wins, and Michigan State again showing today that they have a lot to figure out. Seton Hall, not too good. Rutgers, I think, a little bit underrated. Maybe they're starting to play better. They're getting healthy, and Florida Atlantic, I think, even though they lost, they're playing a tough schedule, and I know they lost to Bryant, and we talked about that a couple weeks ago. I don't think that's as bad of a loss as people say it is. And Florida Atlantic seems to be like they're living up to the hype. We put out a poll a few weeks ago. It was my idea, comparing FAU to the Butler team that went to 2 straight Final Fours, 2 straight championships. And I know people are like, why are you comparing these teams? But honestly, I think it's fair. I mean, I think this FAU team is the first mid-major team since that Butler team that looks like they might be able to run that back. Like, sure, they could get eliminated in the tournament, but they're on pace to get a top 4 seed in March.
Yeah, that big test, I think not this coming week, but the week after, they're playing at Arizona. That's going to be a big test, but I can't see them dropping more than a couple games in AAC play. So I don't know. I'm like a lot of people were top 10 high on FAU this year. I've never been there, but just because that's the case doesn't mean that they've been a disappointment by any means this year or are expected to be a disappointment. So I like the way you put it. Let's go around the conferences next. So same drill as usual. We're going to go around the 6 power conferences, just two. We'll each take 2, and we will give our just storylines, what happened this week, how we view the conference as a whole. We'll start with you, Matt, with your conference, the Big East. Take us away.
Yeah, I think I need to start with Villanova because Villanova, we don't even know what's going on with Villanova. One day they're beating top 25 teams. The next day they're losing to teams in the Philly Challenge. And then it's kind of the same old thing this week. I mean, they go and win against a solid UCLA team. And you're like, all right, like, is Villanova back? I mean, they're 7-4, and they have one of the strangest resumes I've seen through 11 games in college basketball. Like, I don't understand what Villanova even is at this point. But I do think they're a tournament team, and I do think that they're a team that you do not want to play because they have a lot of good guys on this team. Beat UCLA about Justin Moore, too, for what it's worth. They weren't even at full strength. I talked a little bit about Marquette and UConn, but to reiterate, they are at the top of the conference. Creighton is right behind them. Creighton's kind of played an easier schedule lately, so they haven't had, like, a lot of teams are playing great teams. Creighton really hasn't since a couple weeks ago, really. So there's not much to say there. I do want to shout out Xavier for winning a rivalry game against Cincinnati, a Xavier team that I had written off. And I don't think Cincinnati's this great team, but props to Sean Miller for getting Xavier back to 5-5. I think that, it's a Xavier team that had a couple of decent wins, could have came away with another win against San Diego State earlier and didn't. But I think Xavier's a team that we need to take seriously to a T. Like, I don't think we can completely say that they're the bottom tier of the Big East. Other than that, I think the Big East is kind of what we thought of it. Honestly, like, I don't think much has changed in the Big East. If you want to say one more thing quick, I think it would be that St. John's losing to Boston College is not a good look. But I feel like I think a lot of people have already come to accept the fact that Rick Pitino is going to need more than just 5-10 games, maybe even more than just a year. Like, it's not going to be a turnaround in a jiffy. So that's my takeaways from the Big East.
All right. And then I like how you ended on that Boston College St. John's game because that transitions us perfectly into Ben's segment with the ACC.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's fair at this point to sort of put the league into 4 tiers right now. At the bottom, we have the bad teams, right? Louisville, we've already mentioned before. Notre Dame is just as bad, if not worse. And then also, I think Florida State is not that great this year, once again. The thing with Florida State is that in the past, you'd be like, oh, Florida State is so deep. You don't have a guy that they know about, right? But that just means that anyone can go off on any given night. That's like the best way of thinking about that type of Florida State team. But this is on the worst end where it's like, okay, who do they even have a guy that can go off? And I think that's sort of where we're at with this Seminoles team. They just lost pretty bad to South Florida. So I'm going to put them there as well. At the top, I have 3 different teams. Clemson is still undefeated. Brad Brownell's done a really good job. I was not a Clemson believer at the beginning of this season, but they've sort of turned me around there. North Carolina and Virginia are going to be in that tier as well. I think they've done enough to show me that there's proof of concept there. Virginia's back to being an elite defensive team, which I really appreciate. And then North Carolina can just score the ball on basically anyone. And in this next tier is the tier that needs to figure it out. That's going to be Duke and Miami. Miami got crushed today by Colorado, 90-63, and Colorado didn't even have Cody Williams on the floor either. So they got stuff to figure out. I don't think they're as good as the Miami team that went to the Final Four last year. I think Isaiah Wong was a pretty big loss for them that we didn't really – no, we sort of glossed over that part. And then we have Duke. Does not have a resume right now. Their best win is Michigan State, which we've also mentioned is not great. It's not going too well. And then this final tier is basically anyone's game, right? I have no idea who's going to finish 6th in this league, and I have no idea who's going to finish 12th in this league, but they're all going to finish somewhere in there. I wouldn't be surprised to see any of Pitt, North Carolina State, Virginia Tech, Wake Forest, Florida, Syracuse, Boston College, or Georgia Tech all go up and finish 6th in the league. I have no idea what that order is going to be, and it's going to be really interesting. If I had to guess, I think Syracuse is actually looking pretty good right now. So I'm interested to see how they develop over time. But ACC is a really interesting league in the middle of the pack there.
Yeah, I feel like we kind of say that a lot about the ACC. It's maybe not the league that it was before, but it's an entertaining league if you're like a big diehard college basketball fan that really likes to follow like the tournament bubble and like the really nitty gritty stuff. I'm going to move on to my segment now. Let's talk about the SEC, where Ole Miss holds on at UCF this Sunday night, I believe. I believe that just happened. So they lead the way at 9-0. Some close games against some subpar teams. Probably they aren't that great, but Ole Miss is a team that could very easily be on the bubble come March. So the fact that they are 9-0 and they have these wins on their resume, albeit not great wins, that's huge. Going to be huge down the line. Auburn, they really bounced back hard after that App State loss where they struggled to score. They put up 104 in that blowout win over Indiana, which I believe I alluded to earlier. With Alabama, I'm starting to see the vision a little bit. They were competitive against Purdue. They lost a little bit. They're not the team that they were last year. Nobody expected them to be the team that they were last year just because they don't have Brendan Miller. They don't have nearly the athleticism they had last year. That being said, they're a Nate Oates, well-coached, well-equipped to a system squad. So they'll probably be just fine. Like I think they're top 25 quality. It's hard to say who the top team is because like the teams with the best records haven't been tested yet. And then the most capable teams clearly are the ones that have played all these games and they have losses under their belt. I see it as a 2-horse race. There's Kentucky, there's Tennessee, and then there's A&M and Bama trailing closely behind. That's the way I see it. You could interchange 1 and 2. You could interchange 3 and 4, but that's just how I see the SEC. They don't have a top 5 team, but they're probably a little bit deeper, especially in like that upper middle tier than some of these other power conference leagues. And then let's move on to the Pac-12, Matt. So a league that has had a few storylines, especially like today. So take us away with this, Matt.
The Pac-12 is the second best conference in college basketball behind the Big 12. I truly believe that. There's the best team in the country in the Pac-12 in Arizona. I think regardless of what Kansas has done, what Marquette has done, what UConn has done, what any of these other top teams have done, Arizona's proven it. They have ran through their schedule. They're undefeated. And I think the win over Wisconsin really says it even more because Wisconsin's been on fire. They've been winning all these games. And Arizona just kind of said, let's put you off to the side. Let's beat you by, 23 points? I mean, they handled Wisconsin with ease. And that alone raises the Pac-12 up. But Colorado upsetting Miami, a Colorado team that's now 7-2 with a big win over Miami. Washington upsetting Gonzaga. Washington at 6-3. They've played a pretty tough schedule. Now they have a signature win. Utah upsetting BYU. I mean, that's 4 wins this week alone that keeps the Pac-12 there. Let's not forget about Oregon at 6-2. They're still in this thing. USC loses today. But I think everyone's willing to say that Isaiah Collier and Boogie Ellis are one of the best duos in the country. And Bronny James gets back on the court. So that's just a win in general for the Pac-12. Even though USC lost, I think they'll turn it around. Literally the only teams that we can say we don't know about in the Pac-12 are like Cal's not good, Stanford doesn't look too good, and UCLA is struggling. I don't think I left anyone else out. I mean, there's other teams I haven't mentioned that are all playing well, but it seems to me that this could be a year where the Pac-12 gets 6-7 teams in the NCAA tournament. I don't know the last time we've seen that many teams get in, and I'm just a fan of Pac-12 basketball. It's just like Pac-12 football went out with a bang. We're seeing the same thing on the court.
Yeah, a pretty big surprise, too. We were really writing off the Pac-12. I think all three of us are writing off the Pac-12 before the year started. At least me and Ben definitely were. I'm not willing to say number 2 yet in terms of the conference hierarchy. I could have the conversation for number 3 behind the Big East and Big 12, but you bring up good points. Ben, your next conference, we got the Big 12 actually now that we speak. So maybe you could make your case for the Big 12 and just overall your takeaways from this past week.
Yeah, so this is the best league in the country. I think it by all metrics is pretty far ahead of the pack here. They have multiple national title contenders in Houston and Kansas, which I don't think you can necessarily say for the Pac-12. I think the top's a little bit heavier. One thing to note is that this is the first time they really have bad teams in the Big 12. Oklahoma State and West Virginia each are not very good at all. And then you can make the argument that UCF isn't that great either. They just played Ole Miss tough today, but the Rebels got the win there. They haven't beaten anyone, though, so I'm a little concerned about Dawkins and the Golden Knights down there. I'm also interested in the middle of the pack here as well. Baylor is surprising to me, not surprising to everyone in the college basketball land industry, but I did not expect them to be undefeated at this point in the season. I think they've shown a lot. I think they've shown that they're very deep on the roster. And I think that was really important for me to see some of that proof of concept throughout the first time of the season. BYU, you mentioned this before, Matt, they lost to Utah in a tough rivalry game, the Holy War over there. But this is still a fantastic start to the season. I think they are better prepared than many anticipated to make it into Big 12 play. I'm interested to see what Houston looks like as we move into the Big 12. They haven't had the toughest schedule here coming in, but they are 10-0, and they've just destroyed every single team they've played. Their defense is the best in the nation, in my opinion. So I'm interested to see what that'll look like. And one more shout out: we mentioned Iowa State before, but they're having a great year. And then finally, the Sooners. How can we not mention Oklahoma having some great defense? They just pulled off a pretty big win against Arkansas. I really like their rotation there. No stars, really not a lot of household names on that team, but like Milos Uzan and Otega Owe are two pretty big contributors that Porter Moser brought in his first recruiting class there in Norman. So I was glad to see that he's finally turning the ship around after a couple of not great years to start for Oklahoma. But good to see. Again, overall, Big 12 is the best conference in the country.
I agree with that statement. And then moving up north, or at least north for now, to wrap up this segment, we have the Big 10, and I talked about a bunch of their non-conference games in the winners and losers segment and how they just gave up a lot of points. But a few conference games, Big 10 versus Big 10, got underway. Some notable ones, we talked about Wisconsin beating Michigan State. Ohio State got handed their second loss of the year. They played Penn State. That was like a huge second half comeback. I believe Ohio State was up at least double digits at halftime. Nebraska takes down Michigan State. I do want to talk about this a little more because the Spartans were a miss, and I think pretty much everybody in terms of the college basketball media, the college basketball content creation industry. Michigan State I thought it was a hot take to say they're like fringe top 10. And even saying that, we all missed. We just were wrong, I think, to just slate them in like the top 5, top 7 range. And then just looking at this conference holistically, Purdue is Purdue, right? What do you say? What do you have to say outside of that? I think Illinois and Wisconsin, those are decent teams. I'm really struggling to see the depth of this league. I think a lot of people just assume like the Big Ten is going to have, with all those tournament teams, like a really good upper middle tier. And I talked about like how the SEC has that. Because like the bottom isn't terrible of the Big Ten. Like there's some bad teams in other conferences. There's not horrendous teams in the Big Ten, but that upper middle tier that people just assume they usually have, I don't see it. You guys could correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't really see it out of the Big Ten. I see it as Purdue and then like a few like solid, intriguing teams, and then I don't know what else. Yeah. All right. So that wraps up our Around the Conferences segment. For our mid-major segment, we're just going to keep it simple today. We'll each shout out a couple of teams that just have been surprising this year, because it's just been a lot of talk about the regulars, the mid-major darlings. We've talked a lot about like New Mexico. We've talked about St. Mary's not being as good, and we've talked about the West Coast Conference and Gonzaga. But let's talk about some of like the under the radar good mid-major teams. Give them some love. Let's start with you, Ben. What are a couple teams that deserve a little bit of love on this podcast that we haven't really talked about too much?
Yeah, sure. So three quick ones come to mind for me. First is Grand Canyon. The Lopes are currently 8-1 under Bryce Drew. They have a big win. They got San Diego State at home. They were able to pull off the victory there. Their only loss is to South Carolina, who is also better than people anticipate. So I think they're pretty clearly the favorites in the WAC. Also, I want to shout out Indiana State. Also, their only loss, they don't have a power conference win to their name, but their only loss is to Alabama, where they still put up 80 there. And then finally, UNC Greensboro, also 9-1. They have a big win over Arkansas, only losses to Vanderbilt. These three teams and the SoCon and the Missouri Valley and the WAC are teams to look out for, especially as we move into March for potential upset picks if they get matched up with the right team.
Yeah, I wrote down Indiana State as well, 9-1. Robbie Avila is a sophomore that has just been great this year, had a pretty good freshman year, stayed there, and despite Indiana State losing pretty much everyone else, like this man has been the reason for their success. They're ranked 36th offensively in Torvik. That's pretty good. St. Joe's out of the A10, as much backlash as the A10 deservedly gets from us and everyone else. They're 8-2 right now, and I'm ranking them probably top 3 in the A10. They haven't finished with a winning record in Billy Lang's tenure, so that's pretty huge for them. Their loss to Texas A&M Commerce is pretty head-scratching. But aside from that, decent wins over Villanova, Temple, Princeton. Their loss to Kentucky, that was competitive. And if you followed the A10 last year, you know about Eric Reynolds, but he really put himself on the map this year. I feel like now a lot more people know who he is. 28 against Kentucky. I think he had like above 20. 24 is the number. Yeah, 24 against Villanova. So those are my teams. What about you, Matt? Any other teams we haven't talked about?
Yeah, I mean, I do want to reiterate St. Joseph's, because I feel like the Atlantic 10 has been down for the past year and a half, and with Dayton, the way they're playing and the way that St. Joe's is playing, St. Bonaventure on a 5-game winning streak, it seems like the A10 is starting to get some respect back, which I like, because for how great the Mountain West is, and they've really elevated the West Coast basketball for mid-majors, and now the A10 is kind of evening back up. But I've got two more teams. Long Beach State, with wins now at Michigan and over USC. Marcus Jonas started his career at Washington. He was a rotation player at Washington. So I feel like this game was personal for him, getting to beat a Pac-12 team in USC. All the hype that Andy Enfield's squad has been getting. Cool for him in Long Beach State to get that win. They're 7-4, but when you got 2 wins over Michigan and USC, you got to be taken seriously. And then Norfolk State. I know this is super random, but MEAC teams don't get a lot of love, right? Norfolk State, year in and year out, usually gets into the tournament. They're there. Maybe they're getting in. They're normally a 16 seed. I think we got to keep an eye on this team, though, because Jamari Thomas has had some real big games. He had 31 in the win over Illinois State. I know that game went viral for the wrong reasons. I'm not going to get into that. But what I will get into is an away win at VCU by 3 points. I think that's worth buying stock in. I don't think this VCU team is anything too much notable to talk about. I know they're in a transition period with no Mike Rhodes at head coach anymore. But I think that Norfolk State is a team that we need to start taking a little bit seriously. They have a game at Hofstra coming up on December 16th. I think that game and a game at Tennessee on January 2nd are going to show if this is a team really worth paying attention to. I'm not saying that I think the Tennessee game could turn into a blowout, but I think that Hofstra game could be one worthwhile because Hofstra is building a program there. And if Norfolk State ever comes up with that win, I think they're better than these 16 seeds that we've been seeing out of that conference.
Mm-hmm. I love the MEAC love for sure. And just to wrap it up, this is a team that everybody's noticing nationally because like they were in the top 15 of the AP poll this last week. But Colorado State, even with their loss to St. Mary's, I think they still deserve a shout out for just what they've done for the Mountain West. And yeah, that's what I've got. Also, yeah, UNCG, Ben, you mentioned that one. That they're carrying that SoCon, which has not really been great otherwise. Win over Arkansas was huge. So that does it for this past week. Let's get into game picks. We have, like usual, our 7 games that we're going to pick. I've been quite horrendous with my game predictions, so maybe fade me. We'll see. We'll see how it goes this week. I'm planning on playing it a little safer this time. Let's get started. So our first game, we got UConn and Gonzaga. By the way, yes, the first game is Friday because Monday through Thursday of this week just has nothing really super intriguing, exam breaks and whatnot. So the weekend will be good, starting with UConn and Gonzaga. Matt, make your pick.
I think I'm 1-1 in UConn games this week or this year so far, maybe 2-1. This is a tough one because I think that UConn has more talent and would win this game on a neutral floor, but this game is in Seattle. UConn fans typically travel well, but you're talking about going all the way across the country for a game that's on a Friday, not even on the weekend. So because of that reason, I feel like Gonzaga at home, coming off the loss to Washington, is going to be ready for this game. And Graham Ike is a guy who really knows how to body down low. I feel like he is another guy who could give Klingon some trouble inside.
Yeah, this game, I actually couldn't disagree with you more here, Matt. This game does not really move me. I think Gonzaga hasn't shown me much of anything this year. I'm really worried about their guard play in particular. What they did against Washington was not super pretty, especially towards the end of the game. Give me the Huskies. I think their more experience plays out well, and even in a basically road environment.
I'm going UConn as well. I think they've looked like actually the best team in the country right now. And they haven't shown me a clear weakness, even with their loss to Kansas. Like, I can't point to like, oh, this is how you beat UConn, right? I don't know what it is yet. There will be something that comes up, but I'm going with the Huskies. Like I said, I'm making a lot of the safer picks and not taking risks because I want to get my record back above 500 this year. So I'm going UConn. Next game we've got is Baylor and Michigan State. Ben, you can make this pick first.
Baylor. There's nothing for Michigan. Even if Jackson Kohler comes back for the Spartans, I don't think it's going to be close to Jacoby Walter. I think it's going to take over this game. Give me the Bears.
Oh man, I'm not doing this to disagree with you, Ben, but I feel like Michigan State has a sense of urgency, especially after their latest loss to Nebraska, which shouldn't move me to pick Michigan State. But Nebraska's better than people think. They're getting better. I know that program's been trashed lately, but Nebraska's turning it around. Baylor, I did watch them versus Auburn, and they looked a little bit eh. And then I started to like Baylor, and then I watched them against Seton Hall, and they looked a little bit eh, especially against the press. I felt like they struggled against that a little bit. At home, Michigan State.
Wow. I'm going Baylor. I don't see why this line projection is 1 point. I think, like, despite what the analytics say, Baylor's much more talented. I don't really have nearly as much doubt in Baylor as I have in Michigan State. Yes, I can see Michigan State winning this game, but I can't be taking risks anymore with these picks. And then with our game 3, we're going to progress along the Saturday afternoon slate with Houston and Texas A&M. I'm gonna go same logic. I'm gonna go with Houston. I just think that it's a matter of them being the better team, and like as similar to UConn. Like, what have they? I know they haven't been tested. This might be their biggest test to date, but they haven't shown me a reason to doubt them. So I'm not going to doubt them yet. They're a top team for a reason.
Yeah, I don't know who.
There you go.
You go.
Yeah, I actually am gonna disagree with you here. I think Texas A&M, this is a spot to pick them here. I know they just lost to Memphis, but Memphis is a really good team as well. Houston hasn't played anyone really. Their best wins are Utah and Xavier, which still aren't like fantastic. I think in their first big game of the season, Wade Taylor is gonna sort of tear them up. Give me the Aggies in a bit of an upset.
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, I don't know who. Well, I know who picked these games, but as a joke, who picked these games, because they are literally like probably the most even games we've had at this point in the season. Like, these are very big toss. At least to me, I think these are toss ups. I'm gonna go with Houston in this one. I feel like Texas A&M. Like, I really like Wade Taylor, and I like what this Aggies team is made of. But I want to ride with the team that's undefeated, the team that has Kelvin Sampson, the team that just seems to figure it out, even when you're not sure exactly what they have. I feel like Houston, like, they just win. Houston wins, and I'm gonna have to pick them to win.
Fair enough. We've got Arizona and Purdue. This one, unfortunately, on Peacock, but it'll be a great game. We'll start with Matt for this one.
No Peacock slander from me since I'm contracted under NBC. I have Arizona winning this one. Zach Edey, it's kind of been the same struggle so far. I was kind of hoping that we'd see a different Purdue team that didn't have to rely under Edey, but they seem to still have to rely on Edey and have close games in the process. Arizona's been blowing pretty much everyone out. Doesn't matter if they're good or bad. And if Arizona wins this game, I feel like for the first time in a while, we have a number one team that can afford a loss and still might not drop down from the top spot. I think Arizona's starting to separate themselves that much from the rest of the country.
Yeah, I'm with Matt on this one. Give me the Wildcats here. I think they have the makeup of a team that can beat Purdue, especially if Ballo can hold his own one-on-one with Edey in the post. And I just trust Arizona's supporting cast a little bit more than Purdue's at this point. Even though I've mentioned Braden Smith has looked better, I think that the Wildcats have more firepower offensively.
Yeah, Arizona clean sweep across the board. Ben, we've talked about this over the weekend. The formula to beating Purdue is not somehow trying to contain Zach Edey. Like, nobody is able to do that. It's winning despite that. And I think Arizona is just so much more athletic. I think they're going to score a lot, and over under 161. Yeah, that kind of agrees with me. So I'm going Arizona as well. Moving on, we've got a nice little blue blood matchup here between Kentucky and North Carolina. Ben, I'll let you go first for this one.
I like the Wildcats here. I think Kentucky has grown on me a lot, especially since the addition of Aaron Bradshaw. I thought he's looked really good in the first couple games he's played with Big Blue here. I think that Reed Shepherd is once again a fantastic player, fantastic addition. Rob Dillingham. It'll be interesting to see if DJ Wagner ends up playing here, how healthy he is. But even so, I think that Kentucky can score with the Tar Heels, so I'm going to take the Wildcats in this game.
Yeah, a pretty even game again here. I mean, like, Kentucky's definitely been scoring the basketball well, but North Carolina is coming off that loss, and I don't know. I feel like I've been high on this Kentucky team, but after that loss to UNC Wilmington, it was like, oof, like, what do we think of this Kentucky team now? I still think they're good, but I'm not going to shame North Carolina for a loss to Connecticut in practically a home game for UConn. So I think Carolina bounces back with a win in their next big game.
I'm going Heels. I think this is going to be a real, like, 3-point shooting contest. But then you also go based off of the fact that I think UNC offers a little bit more outside of their 3-point shooters on offense at the very least. Like, they still need a big time performance from Armando Bacot in a high profile game. Like his usage rate has been the lowest in 2 or 3 years, I believe. And I think it's time to kind of implement him more. And they have that not as their only way that they could produce on offense, but as like now more of a safety net. So for that logic, I'm going to go Tar Heels in this one. Game 6, we've got, speaking of these in-state rivalries that I just absolutely love, I'm so happy about this game. We've got Cincinnati and Dayton. Can I really trust like the Flyers to win a big game? I don't think I could do it. I don't think I could do it. This is my A10 zero bid league reference. Like I'm not. I'm taking Cincinnati.
I'll go with Dayton in this one. They're playing well. Cincinnati is coming off that loss, and that was like Cincinnati's had a real easy schedule so far. So I feel like their record doesn't really speak to what their team is made of. I think if they had a schedule that's a little bit tougher, they'd be maybe 6-2 or 5-3, and we'd be looking at Dayton as the clear better team here. I'm going to go with Dayton over Cincinnati in a battle of Ohio.
I'm with Dan here. I like the Bearcats in this matchup. I think that they're a pretty deep team for what I expected from Wes Miller's squad this year. I think they got a lot of players, which I appreciate. And like Dan, Dayton hasn't really shown much of anything either, in my opinion. It's not like they've gone through a gauntlet and have a couple of big wins. Give me Cincinnati to come out of this one with a W.
Yeah, it's not even this year. Like Anthony Grant just never wins those A10 championship games. It's a problem with his Dayton program. So that's why I'm going Cincinnati. Final game of the slate, we've got, this is really intriguing as well, Alabama and Creighton. What do we think, Matt?
Gosh, I feel like I want to go Creighton, and part of me is telling me Alabama because of the guard play, but I just feel like Creighton's such a tough place to play at. So at home, I need to go with the Blue Jays. Like another instance of at a neutral site, after seeing what Alabama did against Purdue, I think Alabama would win this game. But Creighton is at home. Omaha is a tough place to play at. So I got the Jays.
I think I'm with you here. I like the Blue Jays as well. First of all, I like the over. I don't care if it's 161. These numbers were pulled from Torvik, by the way. We don't have those lines out quite yet. But there are going to be a ton of points scored in this basketball game. I think Trey Alexander will not have the same performance that he did against Colorado State, where that was their only real slip up so far this season. I like them to have to go off against the Crimson Tide. And I don't think Mark Steers will make 8 threes again like he did against Purdue. So for that reason, give me Creighton.
That was electric, that first half especially. I'm going Creighton as well. We'll clean across the board. One additional note to provide, Alabama, every single year under Nate Oates, they're a team that has one of the highest three-point rates in the country, but Creighton is a team that particularly defends the three-point line really well. I think I saw they were 27.7% in terms of three-point defense this year. So a little bit of a battle of forces to look out for in that game. But I'm also going to go Creighton. For our upset picks, this was something that I've actually done really well over the last couple weeks. I believe there's three podcasts in a row that I got this pick right outright. So just something worth noting despite my top 50-50 game picks. But for this one, I wanted to try to pick a game that was through Monday through Thursday, something to look out for during the week. Couldn't find anything. So I'm going to go with Saturday. NC State over Tennessee. I think NC State will really pound the ball inside. I think this game will inevitably get super foul heavy, super free throw heavy. And that kind of increases the variance, what could happen in a game where one team is clearly favored over another. And then also the Wolfpack have one of these games every year. It seems like usually they end up not winning, but where they play up to the bigger fish in the pond. And this looks like the one. The neutral site games are, I think this one's in San Antonio. The neutral site games are the ones that people where NC State usually steps up to the task. So based on history and then a little bit of game analysis, that's when we go with NC State over Tennessee for my upset pick. What about you, Ben?
I'm looking around and I sort of came to the same conclusion, but I don't know if this is going to be super upset. This team will definitely be favored, but give me LSU over Texas. I think that the Longhorns are sneaky, not that good. And I was high on Texas coming in. They really haven't shown anything. And if you're going to have a 1-point game against Louisville, I think you have a susceptibility to be upset in other places. I like the Tigers enough to where this might be an option for me to take them right here.
I got a pick, and then I got an interesting pick to throw in there after that. My real pick is Cal at 3-6 to beat 9-0 Ole Miss. It's a neutral game in San Antonio. Cal's lost a lot of close games. By 7 to Butler, a game where I really thought they might pull it out. By 9 to San Diego State. 1 possession games to UTEP, Tulane, Montana State. I know not all of these teams are good teams, and Cal certainly hasn't shown it. But coming into the year, they had a lot of talent, and I feel like people were, at least I thought that Cal might be able to turn it around. I feel like I'm not as confident in this pick as I have been in other upset picks, but I am going to pick a 3-6 Cal team to upset Ole Miss. The other one that I'll throw in there, as we might have some breaking news, is that Juwan Howard, there's buzz on Twitter that he is stepping down as the coach of Michigan. I don't know how true this is, so I'm not reporting this, but I have seen it tweeted out by Dick Weiss, who is in the Hoop Writers Hall of Fame. I know that Dick is big into college basketball. He's also a little bit older. I don't know if he's fallen for a trick of one of those fake reports, but if you Google it, if you look it out on Twitter, there is noise out there that something happened and Juwan Howard might be stepping down. They play Eastern Michigan. If there's truth in this, Eastern Michigan's not a good team at all, but that'd be a crazy thing to happen. So why not throw it out there? Eastern Michigan over Michigan.
Damn. Yeah, I mean, we're already over the 50-minute mark, so I guess we'll wait till next week to see how much truth there is. And
yeah,
just how much truth there is, and like we'll uncover the situation a little bit. That's definitely some food for thought as we head out for the night. Thanks everyone for watching and listening. We are live, like I said, every single Sunday night, 9:00, same drill. Go around the conferences, review the big scores, and pick the games. So appreciate everybody for your support. Thanks for watching and listening once again, and take care.